How have we possibly got to the stage where police are arresting and detaining a mother for confiscating her daughter's iPads so they can concentrate on homework? Well, there is a bit of an explanation, which I'll come back to later in the video, but you've probably seen this story reported, where she was arrested and detained for 7.5 hours and questioned and had her place searched, and then released on bail with one of the conditions that she was not to speak to the children and not to see them on Mother's Day. All of which sounds quite ridiculous. So this story was reported by LBC after Surrey police had arrested this lady after reports of, and I quote, a man in his 40s, which might be important a bit later, reported a possible theft, having already been called out to a concern for safety. So they'd already been called out once, and now they're being called out because of a possible report of theft by this man in his 40s. And this is something that I've seen again and again, which will probably surprise you, but it comes up again and again. I'll explain a little bit later, but let's go on with the story. So this lady was taken to Staines Station and she was searched, had her fingerprints taken, custody shots taken, then being placed in a police cell for several hours. The police even went to the children's school and pulled the daughter out of the class in the process. And it wasn't until midnight that this lady was then released, only on conditions of bail that she was not to speak to the children and not to see them on Mother's Day. She said that she couldn't sleep, she was left in a catatonic state, suffered sleepless nights, and raised several questions over why they didn't realise this earlier. As I said, there is a possible explanation, which I'll come to in just a minute. But this, of course, is one of many stories circulating and causing concern as to why the police are turning up and arresting people, questioning people, asking people to delete social media posts because they don't like what's been said or someone's made a complaint. The lady said, I cannot get to the bottom of why my arrest was done in such a quick turnaround. She said, maybe less than an hour. All these police cars and police officers going to an address over a completely false report of a theft. And I'll come on to explain why it is, in my view, a completely false report of a theft in just a moment. The former Police and Crime Commissioner Anthony Stansfield condemned Surrey Police for their handling of this case and suggested that the force should apologise. And I would add my support to that as well. I think the force should apologise, and I think actually they might be liable for compensation for false arrest, because anyone with any sense should really have seen the truth behind this, notwithstanding the possible explanation, which I'll come back to in a minute, I promise, but they really ought to have seen past this and not made the arrest. And even if they did see it necessary to make the arrest, I've seen lots of comments by serving and former police officers of various ranks saying that the custody sergeant really should have put this under the microscope and asked why this lady was arrested in the first place. Because if you don't know, when you are arrested and taken to a police station and detained for questioning, it has to be authorised by the custody sergeant. It is not just a matter of course that you go straight to a cell. The detention has to be authorised. And in this case, I would raise the question as to why that was authorised in the first place. But former Police and Crime Commissioner Stansfield goes on. It seems to me incompetence and a certain amount of overzealousness at a junior level, which the local inspector should have put a rapid stop to. It was quite unnecessary, he says, to put a reputable 50-year-old teacher into a cell for 7 hours. It's hardly likely that she would have absconded abroad, and I would hope that the Chief Constable goes and apologises personally to this poor lady. In response to this account, and this is where we come on to the possible explanation and a more broader picture of the dark side of law and indeed court cases, which I'll explain afterwards. The spokesperson for the force said as follows: they were originally alerted to the potential theft by a man in his 40s, and that the officers attended the property where the occupant was questioned about the iPads and denied knowledge of their whereabouts. So here's the very strange detail that I think a lot of people have probably missed in reading this article, because I think a lot of people, with great respect, don't reach the bottom of the article and don't give it much more attention than the headline grabber and a bit of explanation. But here it is. This is the first question that I would ask, having read the article, with the caveat that I've not read anything else about it apart from the article, and I'm not making statements of fact here, I'm just deducing from what's written in the article. But that detail there raises the question for me: why did she tell the police that she didn't know where these iPads were if they'd been confiscated so the daughters could concentrate on the homework? Maybe she thought it was none of the police's business. But if she didn't tell the police, yes, I've confiscated them, they're in the drawer over there, and she simply denied the whereabouts, but according to the article, the tracking showed them at that address, then that would have given the police reason to believe that she was being dishonest with them. Now, as I say, I'm not making statements of fact here, I'm deducing from the article because that's the question that I would raise. If the police saw necessary to carry out this search, you see, on the one hand, if she'd told the police, yes, I've confiscated them, they're in the drawer over there, so that they can carry on with their homework, why would the police then need to search anything? Because according to the police statement, they say the occupant was questioned about the iPads and denied knowledge of their whereabouts. So if indeed she said, I have no idea what you're talking about, I don't know where these iPads are, but the police knew from the man, which I'll come back to, that these iPads were at that address, then the police would have reason to believe that she was being dishonest about it. Now, if that's the case, she might have thought to herself, well, this is none of the police business. These are my daughter's iPads or my daughter's iPads, and I've confiscated them to do their homework, etc. Then that's just her business. But if the police ask that question and there's a report of theft, however ridiculous you think that might sound, that does create a disconnect there and gives the police a reason to suspect. It doesn't excuse it, and they still should have seen through it, but that's not quite the point. The question still remains, did she or did she not, and if not, why not, tell the police that, yes, I've confiscated them, they're in a drawer over there. The police went on to say that she was released on bail pending further inquiries. They say bail conditions included not speaking to the daughters. That's obviously not to, create the story, etc., to hinder the inquiries. But then following the inquiries, they've discovered that the iPads belonged to the children and she was entitled to confiscate the iPads from her own children. So this brings me on to the man in the story. Now, it seems to me that from that police statement, it seems to me that the police discovered through the investigations that these iPads belong to the daughters. But it also seems to me that this man in his 50s, referred to in the article, is either their father, who is no longer living with them, or an ex-partner who is no longer living with them, and has possibly bought them the iPads, but the mum has then taken them away from the daughters so they could do their homework, and he's made this report to the police to say that they've been stolen. And just before I move on, a lot of people have asked me how I'm connecting to the internet, what the speed is like here and such like. Well, this is where I've partnered with a company called Saley, because they've provided me with a plan here, and indeed Saley is an eSIM which provides you data access on your mobile devices, which you can tether between your devices, so you don't need to wait for a physical SIM card to arrive. You download the app, you buy a plan, and it'll activate as soon as you arrive, giving you seamless access to the internet. It's available in hundreds of countries. And of course, because it's operated by NordVPN, it also gives you an anonymous IP address. It gives you all the security features that you might expect from NordVPN, such as scanning for malware, scanning for malicious websites, and so on, and gives you seamless access to the internet. And of course, as a partner to my channel, they're supporting me here, allowing me to bring these videos to you. You get a 15% off any plan using the code BlackBeltBarrister at the checkout. So you can download the app today. You don't need to buy a plan today, but whenever you are traveling, you will know that you've got an app ready to give you seamless access to the internet. I've been able to install this eSIM seamlessly, effortlessly, and it just activated when I arrived. And so it gave me instant access to the internet seamlessly, and you can do that in hundreds of countries. So it's just one app for your data access wherever you travel. So don't forget, you'll get 15% off using BlackBeltBarrister at the checkout when you buy a plan, but you don't need to buy a plan straight away. You can download it today so that it's ready for when you travel, and it's helped me massively. So thank you to Saley for sponsoring the video. You can check them out in the description below. Because going back earlier in the story to what she said to the media, she said that she confiscated the iPads and popped over to her mum's to have coffee. So it seems to me that the daughters were at home doing their homework. She'd taken the iPads, gone to her mum's so that they could do their homework. This man has then realised that the daughters are at home, the mother is not, and neither are the iPads because he can track their location, so he's reported them as stolen. Perhaps, I mean, this is all deduction here, but that's possibly what happened. But bringing this to my real life experience of the family courts, not saying that this is what's happened in this case, but very, very similar stories have come out in police disclosure when I've been in the family courts where we've had the father or an ex-partner making these malicious reports to the police of all sorts of different things, far worse than just taking the iPads off the children. Far worse reports again and again, police coming out and we get pages and pages, and very often they turn up on a DVD which is full to the brim of different reports and videos and transcripts, police notes, etc., as to what's happened and why the police have been called out by one partner or another. And obviously a lot of these reports are just malicious and fictitious and designed to cause the other party a lot of grief. And indeed, that's the outcome here, because this lady has been caused a lot of grief by these police turning up and arresting her, detaining her, questioning her over the disappearance of these iPads. But the question does remain why the police had to conduct a search using post-arrest powers and then find the iPads. You see, when police arrest for an offence, then they have the powers to search under PACE for anything that might reveal evidence in relation to that offence or alleged offence. But now let's talk about theft itself. Now, can you actually steal your children's iPads? Well, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll do it very quickly. First of all, you cannot steal your own property, because one of the elements of theft is that it has to be property belonging to another. It has to be property also. It can't just be an idea. You can't steal an idea, different to copyright and trademarks and things, but an idea can't be stolen, but property, physical, tangible property can. So for this to have been theft, it has to have been the dishonest, these are the elements of theft, the dishonest appropriation of property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving that person of it. So was it dishonest? Well, no. Even if they belonged to the daughters, even if they were given to the daughters by an ex-partner or their father or whomever, if they were given to the daughters but they were taken from the daughters for the purposes of them conducting their homework, even if they never at any point belonged to the mum, they belonged only to the daughters, they can't be dishonestly appropriated if she's doing it in a parental capacity so that they can concentrate on homework. So is it dishonest? No. So it should have fallen at that stage anyway. Dishonest appropriation. Did she appropriate the iPads? Well, if she took them away from them and took them somewhere else, yes, that element is satisfied. But all of the elements have to be satisfied for this to become theft. So dishonest, no. Appropriation, yes. Property, yes, because they're iPads. Belonging to another, we don't know. They either belong to the mum or they belong to the daughters. We don't quite know. And with the intention of permanently depriving them of it. Well, no, because she took them away so that they could concentrate on homework. So multiple elements of this offence are not made out. So even if this was an admission, yes, I took them away so that they could concentrate on their iPad, and if, I don't know that this is the case, but if they were bought by the father that no longer stood with them, or an ex-partner who no longer lives with them, and they didn't belong to the mum, but they only belong to the daughters, etc., even if all that's the case, and even if that's why the mum might have been worried about telling the police the truth about what happened, etc., it still couldn't amount to theft, because it's not dishonest, because she's done it for a good reason, even if it is the appropriation of property belonging to another, but there's still no intention to permanently deprive, because she's doing it for the purposes of homework. So all of this ultimately sounds a little bit ridiculous. So even though that might be a little twisted web of a story, which I've encountered many times in the family courts, it still should not have got past a desk sergeant, who should have seen past this and think, I've seen this all before. I've seen these kind of malicious reports before. You know, it's a very common thing, particularly with phones, and I'll tell you why. Because when partners separate, when parents separate, they invariably give the child a phone or some kind of communication device. And it even ends up as part of a court order. Do not remove the phone from the child so they've got contact with the other parent. And very often they do remove said phone. And then very often the other person then reports that to the police, the phone's been stolen. But therefore the police have heard this 1,000 times before. And therefore the police should say, well, is it really stolen, or is it just the mum taking it away because they're using it late at night? Because also what happens is, it's not always the father, it could be either way around, but let's just say that the father was keeping the child up at night till 1 a.m, texting messages, and therefore the mum takes the phone off the child, and therefore the father reports it as stolen, etc. You can see how this gets out of hand. But this is how these kind of stories end up going to the police. They end up in court. They even end up in court orders. Do not remove the phone from the child. And that can be a prohibitive steps order. Do not remove this phone from the child. So all of these things cause a huge amount of difficulty between parents, and it's a very sad day that this actually ends up with police putting a lady in a cell for 7.5 hours. So I think this is quite ridiculous, and I think quite frankly, I think at the very least the police owe her an apology, if not compensation. And I think there'd be a lot of lawyers, in fact I know there are a lot of different firms that set out in a no-win, no-fee situation to advise people like this to claim compensation from the police. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think it's a bit silly and I think it shouldn't have got to this stage, but there we are. I hope that's a bit of an explanation for you. A lot of it is just deduction and no statements of fact made about this case. Obviously it's just general legal commentary. You all know that by now, but if you find that interesting, please do subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.